One and live. Greg, here we are. We did it. The tech setup is always hard, but it takes always time, even in 2020, with all of this zooming and thinking. And how are you dealing with that?
I'm adjusting. It's a new world, as you suggest. In my basement a lot in suburban New Jersey, and looks like it will be for a little while. So it's a new world, and we're all trying to make do.
Yeah. What's the situation now there?
Still in my area, people working from home, in quarantine to some extent. You go out just for a good supermarket and such, but there's no really sense that we're going back to work anytime soon in the New York area. There's a phase one that hopefully in early June, in a week or so, they'll be enacting, but that doesn't really affect most professionals. We're still working from home.
Got it. And you work now for the Wall Street Journal for how many years?
23 years has been the Wall Street Journal. I write my books on the side, but I'm still a reporter. I'm an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal.
Gosh, how is working at the Wall Street Journal? To me, it sounds like, in a movie. I work for the Wall Street Journal. It's like that. How is working inside the Wall Street Journal?
It's not quite as glamorous as being in a movie, but there are a lot of similarities. I do investigative journalism, so I look for stories that haven't been reported. I try to dig into, explain why things have happened. I write a lot about personalities, and I'm a sports person, so I like writing about home runs and strikeouts. Or I don't know what you would say that in football, goals, and what's the opposite of a goal in football? I don't even
know. What is it? Penalties or whatever.
Embarrassing. So I write a lot about companies and individuals who make big bets. Sometimes they work out well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they lead to embarrassment and mistakes are made, and sometimes it's huge home runs, as in the metaphor with baseball, where there are big accomplishments. And I think there's a lot of drama in those kinds of stories, but also a lot of lessons too, for investors and for business people and for individuals and any kind of
and that's the reason I think I think is the reason why when some movies, I remember I watched The Big Short was the movie about the 2008 crisis with all, the bets, the financial market. Did you enjoy the movie? Did you watch it?
I didn't see that movie. Sorry.
All right. It's it's interesting because these kind of financial bets, they always have a very interesting, sexy narrative that you wanna relate with. And
so my first book is about that, what happened in 2008 and the people that anticipated it and made billions of dollars betting that the world would have a mortgage collapse. So yeah, I'm familiar with the story.
Yeah. But it's interesting, Greg. I was curious about chatting with you because in this pandemic situation, I don't know, there is so much confusion on one side. And on the other side, there are some incredible stories. I mean, they're not related maybe with the pandemic situation, but this story about the man who solved the market, basically, this mathematician. It was such an interesting discovery. I think I watched also an interview, a TED interview with him some times ago, and I didn't realize how incredible this man was. And then I saw that you wrote a book about him, so I was really curious. Is it Simons or Simmons?
Simons. Jim Simons is the mathematician, and he's worth $25 billion, and he's the greatest financial speculator in modern day finance.
It's also incredible because if I think about some great investor, here in Europe, people always say, like Warren Buffett or Ray Dalio recently is also pushing a lot on social media. But really, Simon is not the first name that come up in my mind. Why do you think it is?
Well, he's a secretive guy. People like Dalio manage a lot of money for outside investors, so it's in their interest to pump themselves up, to market themselves, to talk about how they made good calls. And Jim Simons, the individual I write about at the heart of my book, the man who solved the market, doesn't have, for his key fund, his most important funds, he doesn't have outside investors. It's just himself, his employees, his colleagues, some family, some friends. And it's about $10 billion or so of assets, although they borrow a lot more money, and it gets up to about $100 billion or so. So the key fund, they have some outside funds, some other funds, which are for outside investors, but the key fund is a secretive fund, and they've got no interest in telling everyone how good they are. If anything, they'd rather people not write books about them. So it made it a bit of a challenge.
Interesting. But it's true that you interview like hundreds of people, or is a legend?
Yeah. So basically, how does one write a book about an individual who doesn't want them to write a book about them? So basically, you start with anyone and everyone who's ever come across them. That's people he went to school with. Jim Simon's got a PhD, and talk to people that were in school with him for graduate school. Early part of his life, he was a code breaker for the government, going up against the USSR, the Russians, for the United States government. So I basically talked to pretty much everybody who ever had anything to do with Jim Simons. And eventually Simons came around and talked to me as well. It took a little while though.
So you finally managed to talk with him. And what's your opinion about him? I mean, after you investigated him and searched and researched.
So he's a fascinating individual, and the book is as much, I think, a management book as it is an investing or a trading book, because he really is a world-class manager. He's able to attract talent, get people to work together in just unique ways that I've never seen before. And Simons is a fascinating individual because he's a quant, he's a mathematician. He is really one of the greatest, if not mathematicians, but geometers over the past 50, 100 years. His work is still having impact in all kinds of areas of mathematics and physics. He got a PhD, he taught, he ran a department, but he did other things too. He's not your usual quant. The joke about mathematicians is that an outgoing mathematician is one who stares at your shoes as opposed to his or her own shoes during a conversation. Jim Simons is not like that. He's funny, he's witty, he smokes, he drinks, he still's a chain smoker. So he can do both sides. He can do the quantitative side, but he also understands people, get them motivated, and hires them, and creates incentives within his organization. So he's a very unique individual in that regard. He can do kind of both sides of the brain.
And what is he doing different? I mean, it's only a matter of incredible algos and math in place, or yeah, okay, he can attract talents, but why you think he's so successful?
Right. So he's created this organization. It's called Renaissance Technologies. It's a hedge fund, and since 1988, they're up 66% a year on average. So the question is, what's the secret sauce?
Yeah.
It's my contention that they do about 20 or 25 things better than everybody else, and then they use that and they leverage it up. They borrow them a lot of money. So what do they do differently? One thing they do is they hire differently. They hire different types of people. So today in the world of finance, but also in other areas, corporate America, corporations around the world, everyone is looking to hire mathematicians, hiring PhDs. They have PhDs, obviously, at Renaissance Technologies, this firm I'm writing about. But it's not just PhDs. These are world-class mathematicians and scientists from all over the world, and they hire them. And these are people that have accomplished all kinds of really remarkable things. And they're physicists, they're astronomers, they're all kinds of different, fascinating, really accomplished mathematicians.
Did you just say astronomers?
Yes, not astrologers. They do not hire astrologers. But, a lot of they don't hire from finance. They don't. If you've worked on Wall Street, you can't get a job at this firm, even though it's a hedge fund, it's an investing firm. They just hire mathematicians and scientists, and they hire some of the most accomplished and impressive mathematicians and scientists from all over the world, and they get them to work together. It's a very open system, unlike every other organization that I've taken a look at, be it a tech company, be it an investing firm. They all can see the code. Anybody, the secretary can see the code. And the idea being, Jim Simons is an academic, and he wants people working together, sometimes like they work in academia. And the idea being that if you and your colleagues, let's say, are working on a problem, how to improve the code, and you run into a real issue and you give up and you close the computer and you walk away. If you were in another organization, that would be the end of it. But in Simons's organization, Renaissance, because everybody can see the technologies, can see the code, somebody else and another group will say, well, they had a problem solving this issue. I'm going to take it on and I'm going to try to solve it. So it's a remarkable and a very unique organization, how they run, how they create incentives. Everyone's paid based on this one fund, how it does. So it's a fascinating organization. They do those kind of things differently than everybody else, but they also trade differently than everybody else. They don't make predictions. They don't say, where's Facebook going to be in a year from now, the shares, or Google, that kind of thing. It's all about relationships among stocks. It's a group of stocks and how they interact with each other. If this one goes a little bit higher, this one goes a little lower, should they come back closer together? And it's just a different way of trading and investing than everybody else.
That's crazy. And did you have a look at this fund, how it's performing now in this COVID period? Is still going good, or they also got hit by the COVID?
It is. Somehow, I wrote a story for the Wall Street Journal about a month or so ago, and they were up about 30 or 40% on the year this year. And if anything, this is the kind of market they do even better in. When there's volatility, they take advantage. You can think of them, basically, they look for patterns in the market, patterns that you and I aren't aware of. They could be short. Usually they're short-term patterns. They invest for about, on average, 2 days or so on average, their holding period. So they look at it, they call it internally, they say they hold stocks and other investments seconds to seasons. But basically, you can think of it as a 2-day period, and they're looking for 2-day patterns that you and I aren't aware of. So when you and I panic, or maybe I can't speak for you, when I panic and I sell, let's say when the market's tumbling, that's the kind of thing they take advantage of. When there's fear, when there's greed in the market, they do really well. So in this kind of market, they actually do better than usual.
Crazy. This is crazy. And is he cross with you now that you revealed his secretive approach, or you think he's happy that someone is finally telling his story?
We have a complicated relationship. For over a year, he wouldn't talk to me. Eventually, he agreed to talk to me. He didn't share any of the secret code with me or the secret algorithms, the signals, as they call it. But he was very open and helpful in other ways. He's lived a fascinating life, and even in recent years. So today, he's $25 billion of wealth he's built up, and he's using that to impact politics, to impact science, education, all kinds of interesting things. So he was very open about that when we spoke. So he has a mixed attitude, I think, towards me. He didn't want me to write the book. He didn't want me to share any secrets, but he realizes that I was going to write it either way, and I'm taking it seriously. So eventually, I think he said, "Okay, I'll talk to you and share some insights."
And what about the other people, the people that work there, or people that have relationship with the fund? What's your final idea about all of the organization? Is like, is there any similarity with, I don't know, Google or Amazon, or like the big tech or the big funds, or the radical transparency of Ray Dalio or something like that?
Well, they, in some ways, do radical transparency much better than Dalio and Bridgewater. Dalio and Bridgewater, that organization is not for everyone. Not everyone likes to be critiqued. Ray Dalio, it's a little bit ironic. You could even call it hypocritical. Ray Dalio himself doesn't like to be critiqued, but he is very supportive of the organization that critiques their own people. It's very different at Simons, where everything is done in a group. So you make recommendations to improve the code, and you do it to a group of about 70 or 80. Make proposals, and people work together in a way I've never seen before. There are incentives, as I said earlier. It's a group of really fascinating individuals. There are people on the right, Bob Mercer, who was the co-CEO for many years. He is probably the most important reason why Donald Trump is in office. He played a huge role in that campaign. He supported Brexit. He supported all kinds of different organizations. But you have people on the left as well. So Jim Simons, the key person in my book, is a left-leaning individual, and he supports left causes. And there are all kinds of people elsewhere within the organization. There are libertarians that are all kinds of iconoclastic views, and they work together. So in some ways, I saw it as something, maybe as a lesson for all of us, because at least in America, organizations are being torn apart and families are being torn apart because you have left-leaning people and right-leaning people. And in some ways, this company, this hedge fund run by Simons, is a model in how we can maybe work together. So in some ways, there are lessons there in terms of how to run society, but also just how to work together. And as I said, it was more of a management. There are a lot of lessons in terms of how to grow an organization. But as going back to your question, they don't see themselves as competing with George Soros or Ray Dalio or Steve Cohen and the big hedge funds. They see themselves a little bit more competing with the tech companies. They see themselves as a tech company. So in terms of talent, they compete with Google and Facebook, that kind of thing. So in some ways, they're a tech company that's applied itself to the world of investing and has conquered it.
I wonder, how do they recruit people? I mean, what kind of test they do? Do they look at the CV? They do like 55 meetings to realize if you're good or not? How do they recruit?
So first, they look for someone who's had real accomplishment in the world of academics, some breakthrough. And then sometimes they'll reach out to that person and say, hey, would you think about working at Renaissance? And much of the time, I was going to say most of the time, much of the time, these people have no interest. It's a fascinating group. Until they get there, a lot of these people don't want to get rich. They're not thinking about money. They don't care about trading. The funny thing is, even though this is the greatest trading firm in history, a lot of these people don't care about companies. They don't care about finance. It's a real paradox. And frankly, all my books have some paradox. I wrote a book called The Frackers, and it's about the energy revolution and how all of a sudden the United States found all this oil and gas, but it wasn't the people you would have expected, BP and Chevron and Exxon. And here with this book, it shouldn't have been these individuals who conquered the market, because a lot of them don't even care about investing. Their own wives or their husbands are the ones who invest for them personally. So when they recruit, they'll tell this academic, yeah, you don't really care that much about investing, but look at this as a challenge. And it is a real challenge. Come work with us and take on the greatest challenge you're ever going to face, how to beat the market. And once they get to the firm, they realize that's an intellectual challenge like they've never seen before. And so they recruit a very different way. They recruit just really academics, people that have had real accomplishment in the world of academia.
And can we say, Greg, that they finally found the secret code, let's say, to really beat the market, or they be just lucky for 20 years? I mean, that is also a possibility, you know, or maybe they just have the right approach, and that's it.
Well, you could argue that the time period from 1988 till today is too short to judge them. I would argue that's enough. There are enough data points there, because it's not just on an annual basis, on a yearly basis that they do well. They hardly ever even go down on a monthly basis. So they're very consistent. But I also need to emphasize they're not getting every trade right. They themselves say they get it right maybe 51, 52% of the time. It's just like with a casino, they trade a lot. They're not a high frequency. I'm going to make that clear. They're not a high frequency shop where they're getting in within milliseconds, but they do trade a lot, and they get it right more often than not, 51, 52% of the time. But it's important to note that they're not sort of this high frequency millisecond kind of organization, but they just do it very different way than almost everybody on Wall Street. And is it luck? I don't think it's luck. I'm a skeptical, cynical, even reporter. So I keep waiting for them to mess up. They've had a couple bad periods in their lifetime, but there have been many. So it would suggest that the market isn't so inefficient. There's some inefficiencies left, but even people within the firm say it may not go on. It may not continue. So we'll see. We'll see going forward. But at least so far this year, they've done really well.
And how, Greg, did you have access? How did you manage to have access to their, data? Because I imagine they are a private company, or they're on the public.
I collect a lot of compromising photos of people. No, I'm kidding. No. So what do? I basically made the pitch to people that work there, people that used to work there. And I said, you guys have accomplished something remarkable. And to expect no one to write a book about you is a little unrealistic. So better to talk to me than somebody else writes a book and doesn't take it seriously. And I did. I talked to mathematicians. I had to learn all kinds of complex math that I wasn't familiar with, just to understand the process within the firm and what they try to do. So I made the argument, it was self-serving, but I made the argument that better to work with me and make sure my book is accurate than to pick up one day in the bookstore and be upset that it wasn't. So eventually enough people came around and agreed to talk to me, and I'm forever grateful.
But can a normal person invest in this fund, or is just closed and you are not able to invest with them?
So the key fund, the main fund, is called Medallion, and that you and I can't invest in.
No.
They do have some outside funds.
Well, Greg, you can now. You just call Jim and say, Jim, let me invest a bit.
No, trust me. You can hang up on me. Plus, my employer, the Wall Street Journal, wouldn't allow me, and so there are all kinds of reasons.
Okay.
You also have to have a minimum of several $1 million, my friend. So I'm not at that point where I can pick up the phone and invest millions of dollars. But they have some outside funds that do well. They don't do nearly as well as a Medallion. They're just traded in a very different way. The holding period is longer. There are all kinds of different reasons why they're different. So they have some outside funds that are for institutions. So again, I can't invest in it, and maybe you're wealthy enough, you can. They have higher minimums, but they have some outside funds now.
This math approach, I love this math approach because it gives me the idea that you can use it to solve casino, blackjack, you can the roulette, you can just use it to solve any kind. There was a movie with Kevin Spacey, another 21, I think, was the movie, where the professor was using his knowledge with his students to win at the gambling, basically. And are they using it only for the financial market or in other sectors?
It's a good question. There are a lot of quants, as they call them, quantitative finance professionals, who also use the same approach for things like casinos. Ed Thorpe is the original quant, and he wrote a book about how to beat Las Vegas. So there are some similarities. It's an interesting thought. The people that I write about are too busy making lots and lots of money in the stock market. They don't need to really go to Vegas. It's kind of bores them to some extent. They like poker just to see if they can win, but the money is just not big enough for these individuals. But yeah, one of the reasons why I wrote this book is to understand this mathematical approach to life. And what they do is they create systems and they create mathematical models. And if you look at the best companies today, they all embrace this this approach. Talk about Tencent or Amazon or Netflix. It's all about predictive algorithms. It's about mathematical models. And the idea is, and I've become a real believer in it, is that we as humans, we're susceptible to stories, to really attractive stories, to you hear about a stock or you hear about a company or a person, and you meet the person and you think they're trustworthy. And time again, we realize that we're not really good judges. If you look at some of the biggest mistakes over the past few years when it comes to companies, it's things like WeWork and Theranos here in the United States. It's great stories and CEOs that are salesmen and storytellers. And the lesson that I took from my book, The Man Who Solved the Market, is that systems are much more accurate than stories. So we have to be careful as investors, as consumers, as individuals, in the types of stories that we embrace. And we have to be careful. And to the extent that we can develop a mathematical model that removes emotion, and that's the key to their success, to the success of Jim Simons and his colleagues at Renaissance Technologies. They have stripped out all the emotion from the investing process. They don't even know the companies that they're investing in. They don't care about them. I have stories in my book where they make embarrassing mistakes. They talk to some clients and they talk about a company like Chrysler, and they say, well, when Chrysler goes up and people around the table are embarrassed, they're like, there's no more Chrysler. They're embarrassed of their colleagues because there's no company anymore named Chrysler. So one of the lessons I took from the book, and I think that people should, is that we should try to remove instinct and emotion from judgment in society. And if you look, and it disturbs me that in my own country, I have a president who talks about his gut instinct and how great it is. And We have people in Congress and elsewhere, the Federal Reserve, where they don't rely on systems and on models as much as they should. They're not foolproof models for sure, but they do a better job than just using our instinct and intuition.
Yeah, that's crazy. By the way, after I have a question about the Donald, but
Sure.
I'll keep it for later. By the way, yeah, let me get this question. Marco is asking, are also physicians involved in finding these mathematical models? Are there any specific categories, people or skills that they looking for? Or, I mean, once you are a super genius in a sector, you're good to go?
Yeah, I mean, listen, they're all really good at math, or mostly many PhDs, but they're looking for someone who has succeeded, someone who has accomplishment in some area of academia. They like physicists. They really like astronomers. Astronomers are able, they can't do experiments really, and there are no control groups. So they like people that can figure out, can come to some conclusions, some breakthroughs in those kind of worlds.
Crazy. I understand that I will never work for these people, Greg. There's no chance, like zero.
Podcasters, they're not big fans of, no.
Yeah, but this is interesting, deciding based not based on the emotions, but based on facts. It's really hard, because we vote when we say, there are political campaigns, you always say that people vote based on emotions, not based on facts, and politicians, they leverage emotions. My question about the Donald was how you as a journalist deal with Donald Trump, because it's not easy. I was thinking the other day, I'm very passionate about communication, and I was thinking it's really hard, because I mean, he's the president of the United States. So if he declares something, even if it's a crazy fake news out of this world, is the president of the United States telling that. So what do? You don't cover it. You say, no, I don't. We ignore what he said. You have to cover, but once you talk about it, you amplify his point of view. So how do you deal with that?
That's a great question.
Is it too straight from a non-American point of view, or is okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a balance there. We have to give respect. He's the president of the United States. He's elected president. He might be elected again later this year. And there are all kinds of good reasons why he was elected. So one needs to, and give respect. And yeah, if he makes a comment, we as the media need to give it credence and listen and report it. But when there are times when there are misleading statements that come out of the White House, be it by President Trump or someone else, we in the media need to note that as well. So I think it's a question of relaying whatever comments are made by the president or others in the White House, but also noting when there are mistruths, and there are mistruths in any administration. So we do the same. We did the same with the Obama administration and early administrations too. As a journalist, this era, in some ways, is a great era because there's more appreciation for what we do. The Wall Street Journal's subscriptions have soared. New York Times, all our competitors, all the major papers and media outlets have seen a rise in subscriptions. Cable TV has risen, and President Trump has said that we're going to miss him when he's not here because people aren't going to care as much about the news. So in some ways, it's great. I think people are paying attention to the news and paying attention to what we're writing. The flip side is there's a new way in which people view journalists, and it's in a negative light. And people are free to criticize and mock and disparage what we do in a new way. So I think they do take encouragement from the White House in that regard. A few years ago, I wrote a story about a guy named Jeff Gundlach. Jeff Gundlach is one of the leading bond investors in the United States. And it wasn't the most critical story. There was some criticism in the article, but it was mostly saying, okay, he had done really well for many years, and now he's going through a more challenging period. We didn't say more than that. And he was really vicious in his comments. He called me names. He called me, my name is Zuckerman. He called me Mother Zucker. which is a little bit of a insult. So, and I think people are more comfortable criticizing the media today, and some people are less likely to work with us. Perhaps they call us fake news. And to be fair, the media has made mistakes over the last few decades, so we're not blameless. So in some ways, it's a more difficult environment. In some ways, it's a more positive environment. It's a mixed blessing.
It's there are so many videos of Trump on YouTube dealing with media in press conferences. I mean, it's crazy because it's also difficult to deal with someone like that. If you're a journalist, you ask a legitimate question, and he just, insult you or say, no, this is not true. Why are you asking me that? Aren't you embarrassed to ask that? And you are a journalist. You are there to ask that question. So it's a difficult relationship. I don't know how I would deal with that. I'm Italian.
You said it well. It's a difficult relationship. And to be fair, some in the media also, they do grandstanding. They try to get themselves on TV to some extent, and are critical. But that is our role. Where our job is to speak truth to power, and to have a critical represent the public. So it's a difficult relationship. I'm hopeful it improves, but I'm not optimistic.
Greg, final question. I was curious, you mentioned fake news. And in this pandemic period, I saw so many fake news, conspiracy theories. And I've been talking about this with Yuval Harari. I mean, with so many people. And I'm always curious to understand better this topic, because for instance, Bill Gates, I gave you the latest one that is always in my messages or email. Every day someone is writing to me and say, oh, aren't you embarrassed that you did a video about Bill Gates 2 years ago? Wow. He is, now trying to kill the world. And they start with some crazy theories, or I don't know, Elon Musk. It's not true he's sending any rocket into space. It's CGI. And I always think, wow, this is crazy. People are really crazy. But as a journalist, how do you deal with this? I mean, where is the line where you say, all right, we have to talk about this new 5G coronavirus theory, even if we, believe it's bullshit, or we say, no, we ignore it because it's too crazy. So where is the line that you use in the journal to decide what you're talking about? Because again, you risk to amplify some stupid earth flat theories or whatever. So
it's a great question. There is some line, and you hope you don't cross it. Specifically about the 5G theory, we and others ignored it for a long time, but there is a point where you need to write about how many people believe in something like this. And usually you need a news hook. That's what we do in our business. We look for a news hook. In other words, some piece of news, something that's happened. So maybe it's an elected official who reacts to it. And then once an elected official reacts to it, then we could write about the larger issue. There is, the Bill Gates thing, the conspiracies about Bill Gates. Listen, on a personal level, it's just distressing. And to me, it reflects how we as society, and maybe it's the United States, and maybe it's global. We've shifted away from embracing knowledge, and television and the media culture and Hollywood has become more important. We've dumbed down society such that instead of reading a book, people would rather go on Facebook and discuss a theory, some conspiracy that has no basis to it. And it speaks to also a society in tumult, and so many people, and we have to be aware of this as journalists and be appreciative and sensitive to it. There are a lot of people, young people and older as well, have gone through difficult times since the 2008 meltdown. They've lost their footing, they've lost their jobs, they're worried about the future. When you're scared, you embrace when you embrace conspiracy theories, but also it's an issue of leadership, frankly. So leadership needs to point out when these theories are bunk, when there's no basis to them, and sometimes leaders don't do that. So to your question, it's a great point. You don't want to amplify, but you need to reflect when conspiracies get to the point when there's violence done against 5G towers, when people start doing certain things, then we as a news organization need to report on that, and then we could write about the overall theory and the conspiracy behind it. But just to write about there'll be new conspiracy theories every day of the week. But sometimes they get to a mass when you have to write about them, Bill Gates and such. But we have to write about it, but it's distressing on a personal level. And listen, I'll write an article, and some of the response I get is thoughtful. Or I'll write my books. For this book, most of the response has been thoughtful, but you get people spouting crazy theories too. And just as a citizen, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah, it is. But it's not depressing, the SpaceX NASA launch. How was the reception there in US for the Saturday space launch?
See, even that gets politicized. Everything's politicized today. It's really sad. So some of the right-leaning newspapers in the United States put that on the front page, as opposed to the rioting and the marching and the protests, which are much more important. So I think some in the United States are trying to distract us from what's really important, and that's some societal upheaval going on. You can say there's been too much in the way of rioting and looting, and that's really distressing, but there's some real important issues that need to be addressed. So the space launch, sadly, has been politicized as well. Some people say, oh, it's a sign that America's back and we're better than everybody else, and it has to be embraced for some reason politically. But that is potentially a good sign. Hopefully they have some sort of achievement and accomplishment out in space.
Yeah, a little bit of light out of the pandemic.
Do you see that as a light? Do you see that as a positive? How does it affect you and I? I don't know.
No, it doesn't affect, but it's when you see like a push to the future, innovation, I think is always a good thing. I mean, in the end.
Can't hurt. I'm more focused right now on the real fascinating innovation going on by the scientific researchers in terms of finding a vaccine or treatments for COVID. I've been writing about that a little bit, and I find the global chase to try to solve this pandemic really fascinating, interesting individuals, approaches, scientists, the fact that they're working so hard to try to stem this, partly to gain fame and fortune, but also partly to help us all. That really encourages me, and I'm really optimistic. I see some of the early work, and may not be as soon as we'd like, and even that gets politicized, sadly. But I am encouraged by the scientists, and they're in Europe, they're in the United States, they're all over, working really hard and using interesting, innovative approaches to try to come up with vaccines and treatments and drugs.
Great. Greg, thank you so much for this chat. Really appreciated. The man who solved the market. Really interesting and great job. I mean, great investigation in a very interesting topic, and a very interesting person.
Thank you. And a lot of my best story ideas and book ideas and ways I improve my writing comes from viewers like you and from others. So feel free to reach out to me, give us, as we call it, constructive criticism, but feel free to criticize. And we're open. We journalists need to improve, and we're always looking to improve. We in no way think we have the answers. So feel free to reach out on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, what have you, and love to hear people's thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Keep in touch,
Sure.
Greg.
Great to see you.